Hi everybody. Alright, so we're gonna finish up kind of what I was talking about in the March videos. I had like 3 more that I was gonna post, and there was just some technical difficulties, so we're just redoing them. No big deal. But it's definitely a good word. So we're just gonna break this up into little pieces, and then in a couple other videos we kind of talk about what I've been hearing for this month. So we'll hopefully, the Lord will be able to teach you guys and speak to you, and hopefully this encourages you to, dive deeper into scripture, for sure. So this topic, we'll just kind of get right into it, is on the book of Obadiah. If you haven't read it, it's actually like a really small letter chapter, which we don't actually know if his name was Obadiah, but it's what it's named after. But essentially, there's like kind of like 2 parts, and it's still very relevant to read, in Christian circles, because there is a portion of it that talks about like end of days, the coming of the Lord, stuff like that. But the first part of the letter is also very beneficial for us as well, because it speaks about pride and betrayal and just good stewardship overall, right? So the book of Obadiah addresses the law of sowing and reaping, which we should be familiar with the teachings of Jesus, but also the teachings that Paul wrote to the early churches as well. So as Christians, it kind of warns us, not to allow pride to blind us when our brothers and sisters are in like spiritual captivity, right? Or, just in a life circumstance or hardship, instead, aiding our brothers and sisters when they are in need, right? So this letter was written to the descendants of Esau, the Edomites. And there's a couple of different books in the Minor Prophets that are addressed to Gentiles, quote unquote, but they are still part of the biblical family, which just goes to show that there's no Jew or Gentile because we're all part of one family, right? Essentially the Edomites allied themselves with the Babylonians and Assyrians, or it's one of the two. And pretty much they joined hands with the enemies to go against Israel, right? Because their father Esau had hate towards their brother Jacob, as kind of poetically addressed in the letter. And it kind of has like these parallelisms, which if you kind of read just like Genesis, you get like the gist, But yeah, essentially they were the reason why Israel was brought into captivity, at least northern Israel, right? So this kind of speaks about how like rifts and divisions within like relationships, whether it's friendship or familial, like, it could last for generations, right? And if no one's willing to make peace, then it's just gonna continue to just get passed down, right? Just like this seed of hatred. I guess historically, I could just think of like the Hatfield McCoys. If you want to think like literally, like in literature, I guess like Romeo and Juliet, like the Capulets and the Montagues, like sworn enemies, whatever. Or like, I don't know, I'm thinking of other Shakespeare's, like the War of the Roses, like it's just people be beefing, and the root of it is just hate. And Jesus does talk about, like blessed are the peacemakers, right? So it is up to us, being followers of Jesus and being heirs to the kingdom, to be peacemakers. And that often starts with being the one to mend the broken bridges, right? And the Edomites, they thought their alliance would protect them, but those same enemies turned around on them and attacked them too, right? Because those enemies, they just want land, they just want territory, right? So as you can see, like spiritually in spiritual warfare, like in today's circumstances, like the adversary, the enemy, like is seeking spiritual territory, right? The things that God has given you in full authority and giving you stewardship over, right? And God entrusts you to be like that light in those areas and in those circumstances, to be the one that shows what it means to be humble, to show what it means to be the greatest in the kingdom, which is to be a servant, right? And to do it with compassion, to go the extra mile. For a parent, your like spiritual territory could be like, your children, and then you have like your career, your field of influence, which would be like your friends or like your neighbors, if you're married, that's also a type of stewardship you have. These are just areas that you are meant to just protect, because these are the spaces that you are pretty much like the gatekeeper for people to have access to God, right? Because we're the mediators, we're the advocates here on earth to lead them to Jesus. Even if they're like a weaker brother or sister in Christ, it's still the same thing. Like we are like the ones that are supposed to be able to build each other up, right? And show them the ways that are straight, and not, to pick them up if they are stumbling, right? And of course, when Christians slander, or there's envy, or there's just dwelling on past differences or offenses, it gives, the accuser, Satan, the enemy, like a foothold, and we should never let any type of access at all, right? To the enemy. And of course, like Satan, he'll kind of turn on those, who join, on his side, as he does, because it's just petty like that. It's very predictable, right? I mean, it's just, being cunning, deceitful, a liar, a backstabber, like all those things that he's always been since the beginning. It's like the only things that he can create are just lies. And when you think about it, like the things that hold us down are often things that are repeated generationally, right? And I mean, like, you're battling with spiritual beings that have been around since like God created the heavens and the earth, so like they have some more, I guess, ancient knowledge, which is just, and us humans, we're just kind of like fresh off the boat, but like we were just born yesterday, essentially, on like time scale wise, and they just be using the same tricks, right? It's like, oh, like let's give this person like childhood trauma, or like, oh, let's make this person insecure, oh, this person's gonna have like a really big impact on the world, let's make sure they feel small and can't actually have a voice or whatever. It's like the playbook is very noticeable once you know the rules. And of course, pride and betrayal and things like that. I mean, when you think of like envy and covetousness, these are all things that are pretty much just a corruption of, like, say, a virtue. So, like, say, admiration would be the positive, but like corruption, would be envy, right? Or jealousy, and admiration can be positive because it's like, it's good, you're encouraging that person, you're like, wow, I really like their influence, blah blah. But if you have like envy and jealousy, then you're just like, I hate them, there's a bit of covetousness in there, like and again, like, these are just things that once there's a foothold in, like similarly with Cain, like when sin's knocking on the door, you're gonna let it in. and This is why we shouldn't be following the ways of Cain, Korah, or Balaam, you know. And I did find the book because I read it recently. It's in Jude. It was also mentioned in other books too, but like Jude kind of like reference drops it in like all one go. Which that's also a short book to read. So if you just want to start somewhere light, definitely Obadiah, Minor Prophets, and then you can also read Jude because these are just like a single chapter for just a short read, right? Especially if you're not a reader. I mean, I also recommend audiobooks, but those help too. But yeah, like even think about like how the enemy was able to deceive Eve, like um that level of just attacking innocence and just trust is just an act of betrayal altogether, right? But yeah, like we as Christians are kind of called to, love, pray for each other, support one another, and not to stir up resentment, right? If you cause offenses and you haven't asked for forgiveness, that's gonna have some level of resentment in the other person, right? And I mean, we all face seasons of suffering and, consequences of our choices, right? If we act in disobedience, outside of God's will, it's kind of similar to like Jacob, right? And, once we wrestle and emerge with a new nature, right? Yeah, so pretty much kind of just recommunicating, I guess, just what Jesus has been talking about and Paul was very adamant about in the Corinthians, and it's just to build up the body and not to tear it down, like not to add strife and hate. And we should be the ones that are just living peacefully. And why would you like add more distress to your fellow brothers and sisters who are already facing hatred from the world? you know, um, it's just an added thing, and this is why I think Jesus really communicates like forgiveness is so important, right? Because if you're not asking someone for forgiveness and you know that you might have caused them harm, aren't you just acting and walking in pride? And it's similarly like if you're refusing to forgive somebody, why are you refusing to forgive them? Like, why are you giving them that foothold on you? Like we're supposed to be walking in freedom. So that's definitely something to think about. And just to keep this video short, I will just end it here. But yeah, like we have things that we should be taking care of, and let's just continue to take care of things, right? Not try to destroy them and to build them down. Because then what are we acting like? Not Jesus. We're acting more like, the opposite side. And like we're children of the light. Like why we're not trying to walk in darkness, right? So yeah, we'll keep it short for the next video. But yeah, definitely pray on it. I encourage you guys to read Obadiah. And just kind of, I guess review kind of also the relationship that Jacob had with Esau. Because I mean both of them were equally deceitful, but Esau had more pride and Jacob was deceitful, but Jacob had a new nature, right? And Esau didn't. And it's pretty interesting when you like kind of look at like how they were both equally successful, but both had different relationships with God,